Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Elena Bortolotti, and I'm Chairwoman of the ECBC Rating Agencies Working Group, and also my day job, I'm Global Head of Covered Bond Structuring at Barclays. Maybe just as a brief introduction, a little bit of an apology from my end, because I'm a bit of a novice to green bonds, but I would say a veteran in covereds. So I hope I use the right terminology, because I know there's lots of terms flying around and everybody's quite sensitive to, you know, ESG, green, sustainable, etc. But anyway, before I start, I'd like to briefly ask my speakers today just to introduce themselves, and then we kick off on data sustainability.
Yes. Daniela Antonini from Banco BPM. I work in the finance department and I'm involved in the covered bond issue.
Yes, I'm Carmen Muñoz, and I work for Fitch's covered bonds team. I'm a senior director and mainly responsible for regulatory work as well as criteria work, and also involved somehow in ESG.
Jane Soldera from Moody's. I'm in the covered bond team, where I sort of carry out a lot of work on legal and regulatory matters, and I'm also a member of our EMEA ESG working group.
My name is Gordon Kerr, and from DBRS, and I head up our European structured finance and covered bond research effort at DBRS.
Thank you. I think we've heard, I mean, lots of references to data across, I think, mainly in the panels this afternoon, and how important data is. But maybe one of the things we're forgetting is that obviously data is also crucial for the rating agencies. And I thought what we would do is just briefly ask each of the rating agencies to give us an overview of their green or ESG methodology and what their quantitative and qualitative data requirements are when assessing and assigning ratings to green bonds. So maybe Carmen, would you like to start?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see that you know, when we speak about ESG, we've been focusing essentially on the E over here and part of the S and none on the G. So in terms of that, Fitch has taken an integrated approach into measuring ESG. And what we've actually done is this integrated approach means that we've actually factored that into our ratings already. And so what we've done is, with investor desire for more transparency and information, we've gone back and we've looked at our ratings and see where ESG has actually influenced our rating decisions. And interestingly enough, we'd started rolling that out towards corporates first, and then we followed with FI, and after that, we've also gone into sovereigns. And interestingly, one of the key things that we've noted was that governance was a very important part of it. So, when you're looking at the ESG equation, you're actually looking at the three, working together and having some influence on each other.
From Moody's perspective, Jane?
There is sometimes a bit of confusion out there about what we're doing in terms of green ESG sustainability, and it is divisible into two different heads, and they're not unrelated. But on the one hand, we are always thinking about credit first and foremost for our ratings. So we are looking at how ESG factors could influence credit issues. And on the other hand, we're also making assessments of green bonds. So we're doing effectively second opinions on green bonds that speak to environmental factors. And we're also looking at social and governance issues, primarily at the moment on the credit side. And we'll also be in future rolling those out more on the separate assessments as well. So there's a different approach depending on whether you're coming from a pure credit angle or a wider sort of sustainability angle, not necessarily just credit. so we have a green bond assessment, for instance, that looks at different factors and has different data needs, but not necessarily a lot more extensive data needs. So for a regular bond where we're issuing a credit rating, we're able to look at environmental issues, for instance, and take them into account. And in order to plug gaps that we may have between our existing methodologies, which attempt to take into account ESG factors, we've also issued a separate ESG methodology earlier this year, which allows us to plug any gaps that may exist in our specific methodologies across sectors. And that looks further ahead, maybe beyond the time horizons that we might have in other areas, and looks at issues of transition and adaptation as well. So taking a broader perspective and trying to be more transparent around that subject.
And Gordon from the DBRS.
Yeah, so we, at DBRS, it was about 2 years ago now, I actually just looked it up, I brought to the team the prospect of having green ratings similar to what Moody's has. At that time, I think it was Moody's is the only one that actually had produced anything. And we sort of generated a working group within DBRS across products and asked the question, okay, well, what are we really looking at here? I mean, as pointed out, we are a credit rating agency, so we are looking at credit and we are looking at the ability for that bond to be repaid, pay timely interest, and it's very difficult to separate that from the green part anyway. But one of the conclusions that did come out was, okay, governance, part of that's incorporated already, depending upon what you're looking at, maybe less so on the secured space and more so on the corporate space. It's already evaluated as a part of the credit methodology, in part, maybe not on the same time frame as highlighted as well, so looking at maybe a little bit shorter time frame, but the governance part is there. The social side, okay, that's probably a little bit less a part of the credit analysis, but there are some elements that are there. There's some gaps as highlighted. And the green is the element where it's very difficult to make a credit assessment as a green credit. And part of the reason for that is the data and the fact that the data was not there. As highlighted just on the last panel, there seems to be some development on that side. But it was difficult to justify in all cases a credit differentiation for something being green. So as a result, we've sort of been debating this over the time frame, and we are looking to come out with something. Again, it will probably be something separate from the credit analysis, so something along the lines of what some of our competitors are doing in terms of a separate green type assessment, and then making steps from there, hopefully as we get more data, more evidence to suggest certain elements, we can then build something that is more oriented to the to making a differentiation if there is a credit case for that.
Maybe just to stay with, going back to actually, sorry, to Jane. Interesting enough, last week you released a press release commenting on the EU energy efficiency agenda. And I believe one of the Moody's comments was that the agenda will affect the value of non-compliant properties and create risk for cover bond collateral. Can you maybe expand a little bit on that?
Sure. This report that we've just prepared was it's very similar to one that we recently did on CMBS and RMBS as well. So we're looking specifically at collateral risk, and we're sort of separating that out because, as we all know, cover bonds, you know, there are dual recourse. We have bank risk, collateral risk, and we're not really looking at the bank risk side of it. We wanted to just focus on the collateral for this purpose. And what we concluded in our earlier report and in this report is that the EU's energy efficiency agenda is just incredibly ambitious. If you're looking at something like 45% reduction in emissions by 2030, that's so ambitious, and given the role of buildings, and I'm sure most people here have heard this over and again today, the role of buildings, the importance of the energy efficiency of buildings, if we're actually going to get from where we are now to that kind of reduction in emissions, that's really going to take some doing, and it's going to have implications for those that are left behind. Obviously, there's some very interesting work being done on saying that an energy-efficient mortgage is lower risk or better credit risk, but our focus so far has been mainly on, if we look at the scale of the ambition, it's the concern as of right now is if that is successful, if that ambition is realised, it's the ones that are left behind that have the most work to have more to be concerned about, in the sense that everyone is going to be moving forward, or going to have to move forward. And if indeed this can be realised, then it's going to have to become a increasingly mandatory requirement, and particularly if the less that we have people stepping up through things like EMAP and the less success, hopefully that is successful, but if there's any sort of push, then it's going to end up becoming more mandatory in nature, and there's very few mandatory requirements at the moment. But if it came to that, then you can foresee there being, again, real problems for selling a house that maybe is unable to comply with what may well become legal requirements. And it's really that kind of future that we're looking forward to, and saying, well, this is a transition which has a lot of risks in it for those that don't comply.
But just wondering and thinking out loud, I mean, obviously the rating agencies, and you each have, going back to cover bonds, you have your specific data tapes. I mean, to be able to assess this compliance or none of the property, I would expect that, you would all require additional data fields to make these necessary checks and then, make your decision and credit decision. I mean, do you think, there's been a lot of discussions, and we've talked a lot about new data templates, but it just seems that, if we think of issuers, they're just bombarded with, requests from various fronts, with regards to data requirements. I mean, is there a way that maybe, the rating agencies could, maybe work closely with the, the Energy Efficiency Initiative, Mortgage Initiative, and other regulatory bodies, so that we could come up with a harmonized, in a way, or one common tape for issuers, so that they don't get multiple requirements. Do you think that's something feasible, Carmen?
Let me get this one. Yeah, I think we all saw how the ECB has put the pressure on the rating agencies to disclose information for the purchase program. So, there was a lot of burden already on the rating agencies, and I think even then there was a big struggle to put all this data together, and it still is a struggle. So, it's going to be a big challenge, I would say, and as much as we can insist, it's only as good as the data that's provided to the rating agencies in the end. I think a lot of work has been done. That we have to say. It's very clear that there's been a lot of work done until now, and we need to do a step further on this. So I think the first thing is we have to go step by step, get things right, and then move forward towards having more enhanced data.
Thank you, Gordon.
The more data, the better. So we work, I think one of the rating agencies work on an evidential approach. So you provide evidence that then that drives the way that we operate. So to gather the evidence required is difficult to define because you haven't analyzed all of the data, and so therefore you don't necessarily know the exact, okay, is how much more efficient is solar than putting in a ground source heat pump in terms of improving the efficiency in a house. So therefore, do I need to analyze whether or not the pool contains 50% ground source heat pumps versus 50% solar in order to make a differentiation between the two, or is there maybe something that's you know, really not really differentiating between the two in terms of improving energy efficiency? So it's a real challenge to predefine the data when you haven't analyzed any of the information that's there. And so as a result, I mean, we're happy to try and collaborate to find where the right thing is, but until we've each defined our methodologies for evaluating mortgage pools in this way, it's very difficult to predetermine that information. But I do think that the initiative that has been started, the EDAP and EMAP, is certainly the right way to go because it's providing information from the ground, so from the people that are experts in those individual areas. And it's a collaborative approach to try and solve the question. So for us, I think that is certainly something that we support. Yeah, and as I say, I think the more information, the better. I know the covered bond world doesn't necessarily work on a loan level basis, but I mean, I would argue that going down to a loan level basis would be the ultimate sort of goal. The European data warehouse is here, and there's been some work on the securitization world, so that such that there will be some information provided on loan level information going forward through the ESMA template. That's voluntary, but still there is the potential for that to come through on that side. But you know, any information is helpful.
Yeah, well, we'll probably see Luca adding a green HTT template to a new tab to the label. Why don't we move on? I'd like to move on and hear sort of the point of view of an issuer. Maybe before I ask Daniela, I really wanted to thank you for stepping in last moment because unfortunately Francesco has fallen ill, so thank you, Daniela. So I know that at Banco BPM you have sort of a green task force and you're very close also to the various initiatives with regards to the green bonds, but it'd be interesting to understand from an issuer's perspective, effectively, what you're doing, you know, within your bank to try to, I guess, gather the necessary data, because that is, I think, probably the largest and most difficult hurdle to overcome.
Thank you, Elena. Being an issuer and structurer of securitization, as you know, data requirement is quite familiar for us, and provide data for the template, for the rating agencies. We are quite familiar. But when we started and joined the EMAP project, we started to think on how to reach two goals: develop new products, new green products, mortgages or other kind of product, and then how to finance these loans. And both goals need data to support. If you want to develop a new mortgage product, we thought that it was necessary to know the loans already granted to the borrowers and to know if the building were not energy efficient in order to go to them and ask if they wanted a new mortgage, maybe for the renovation of that building. And for the finance side, working in the cover bond department, we started to think at a cover bond, an issue of a green cover bond to finance these loans. So we started analyzing our stock, mortgage stock. We analyzed the mortgages granted by our bank since 2000 until 2018. It is about 20 billion stock of mortgages granted for the purpose of buying a house, first house or second house, and for renovating, even if, as we were talking this morning, renovating is not, usually banks do not finance renovation of houses granting mortgages, but with consumer credit is more common. In fact, in 20 billions, only 150 millions are granted for renovation purposes in our bank. So, underlying these 20 billion mortgages, we have more or less 230,000 buildings, residentials, identified by the category. They are all in residential categories, and we started to get data for these buildings. First of all, the year of constructions, which was easy to find in our database. But the most important part is to have the APC of these buildings in order to know where we are, if we have brown or green properties. So we started to think on how to collect this data, and we found that about 90,000 of these buildings are located in Lombardy, which is the only region who has a public database of the EPC of buildings. So we matched using the property cadastral data. We matched each building with this database and found about 1/3 of our buildings. And at the end, we saw that less than 10% is green. I mean that it is in A classes plus B classes. And this is the first goal we reached. Now, the second part is to get the data for the remaining buildings from one side, and then start an IT project in order to collect this data, which now have been analyzed using a normal Excel file, Excel sheet, and in a structured IT database in order to manage, to update, and to do the reporting for investors in the case we issue.
You were mentioning that there was one region that said that for privacy reasons they couldn't give you the data. Is that correct?
Yes. If I found this database in Lombardy just searching on Google, I'm used to do this, and afterwards I started to see what about the other regions, 20 regions in Italy, and see that some regions, especially in southern Italy, that don't have, unfortunately, a database, but another one, which is Veneto, has the same database, so I sent them an email in order to collect this data, but they told that it was impossible because of Italian privacy law, GDPR. So it's quite amusing that two regions have the same data, which would be very, very important for us, for banks, but one give you as a normal person. You don't need to be an expert, you don't need to work in a bank. You can go in the database on the internet and download something like 1,500,000 EPC. On the other hand, other regions decide not to do it. And this has been our first approach to this project. We are strongly working. We hope, of course, to find a way to get the other EPC for the rest of the building. And another point, very important, is for the new loans, so the new mortgages that we are going to grant to borrowers, because we will need also in that case to collect the EPC. And the fact is that it's possible, but it's expensive. And in this time, it's difficult to go to the board and get attention and the commitment to spend money for this green project. So as a bank, Italian, but I see that it's the same for the European, other European countries. It would be very important from, I don't know, European Commission to help us to get this data.
Hopefully to convince some of the regions to release the data which is readily available. I think, well, if we look at the agenda we had, we were supposed to touch on, you know, the investor's perspective. Unfortunately, we don't have an investor with us today, but I've had a chat with Gordon earlier, and I know that in some cases investors do reach out to agencies, you know, to ask for data or your perspective, obviously, when analyzing, you know, issuances. So maybe you can share the type of feedback and maybe data requests that that investors have approached you with.
Yeah, sure. I think the big point, or the bigger picture, is that it's not just about the people that are classified as green investors anymore. There is a real push for ESG requirements from asset owners into asset managers to define what they are doing, how they are investing their money, and really understanding the ESG element associated with their investments. And so I think this is, the migration is moving beyond just a defined green fund and into the broader investment picture, just to even understand the way that it works. I give the example of the Norwegian sovereign fund, who's switched wholeheartedly in the direction of ESG, as opposed to just investing individually into a green fund. They are now migrating their whole investment philosophy associated with that. So they will invest into funds, but they will need to define how that money is invested and whether or not it is sustainable investment. And I think that is a theme that will carry on, and the recent discussions around regulatory framework and the change and drive from a commission perspective and a regulatory perspective will continue to push that even further through the system. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we're a little bit short with and tight with time, so Luca's asked me to keep it short. I think it's the end of the day and been a long day, so I'd like to thank obviously my panelists this afternoon, and then I'll hand it over to Luca.